A lot to get to with George and House of the Dragon, so let's begin. Let's start off with I think the tentative good news is that Winds of Winter will probably be released either next year or in the next 3 years. We'll provide some details as to why that should be the case on George's new announcement on his blog, but I want to deal with House of the Dragons first because that's not as interesting, but that can be done relatively quickly. Essentially, the deal is that it will be premiering near the end of the summer. A lot of people expected them to basically wait out Rings of Power, but no, apparently some episodes at least will overlap. I think Dragon Demands is correct as he theorizes that half the season will basically be with the young characters in House of the Dragon, and then we'll get to the older characters. But let's not bury the lead. There's been the release of a recent trailer, and it is very, very reassuring because so far, the media we've been given in terms of the images as well as the teasers before this didn't really explain a whole lot. It's just a lot of fancy stuff of swordplay, intrigue, and women look beautiful and all that, but not really clear where we're going with this. But now finally they have at least revealed a few things. This is a crisis of succession. Just been following this passively. You really don't even know what this thing is about. Okay, there are dragons, but what does that even mean? The dragons and the Targaryens are going to be at war with one another. There is a succession crisis, and something just goes wrong, either in terms of the marriage or in terms of how they're figuring out how to divvy up the empire, and it's a struggle for control. Now, in terms of the canon, this happens far after the initial conquest by Aegon. So, presumably, this is the house in decline. So, Robert's Rebellion is a little ways off. The context may be a little fuzzy, but I do think the trailer is very reassuring that we're going to get a very high quality product. I still have quibble on certain things like the race swaps, and some of the costumes are not impressive. Some of what the performers have said is a little worrying, but overall, it's mostly pretty good. I think it's definitely giving us a lot of good signs of a solid story ahead. And now we turn back to Winds of Winter and George. Essentially, what he announced is that Winds of Winter will be the biggest book of the series, at least comparatively to Storm of Swords, and Dance of Dragons. What does that mean? Well, he knows that this is going to be one of the biggest books. That means he already has to have a rough idea of how big the book is, which means the book, by definition, has to be in its completing stages. Again, that may be a wrong inference, but again, I follow Dragon Demands here. There's a physical limit to how big the book is before there are problems with the publisher. So if he's nearing that limit, that means he has to know at least roughly the size and scope, because that's what we've been worrying that he hasn't really been doing any work on Winds Winter. That's not true. He clearly has enough material that it's going to be a very, very big book, but he isn't at the stage yet of trimming it down, and that's probably the most critical. And I would note that I've actually had experience with this before because Stephen King, with The Stand, brought out, quote, an original edition years later after the first book was published. And as he admitted, basically the publisher forced him to cut it down because he just made a calculation that how big the book was going to be unprofitable, and then it would be more profitable to bring out a smaller book. So these things are real, like the book size and how this is something that authors and publishers talk about. So if George is at the stage he's telling us this is going to be the biggest book, by definition, he has to already know how the book looks like and how many pages there are and what he's going to have to cut out to make it at least viable for it to be read by the public. That is a good sign that the Winds of Winter are nearing the end stages. When exactly, unclear, but we're in the end game. Now, does that really tell us anything about the final book? Probably not. Again, will even the Winds of Winter be good? We don't know yet. All we can say is it is finally coming to a close. But I want to end off by saying that if you are an old time subscriber, one of my first videos predicted it would come out much earlier. I stand by that because that's what the information was telling me. So even though the book may be ready to go, it still may take a while to get to us. We've been down this road before with George, but I do think we're finally confident it is finally coming. I just don't see why he's putting off giving an official announcement. I guess he just wants to make sure the trimming is done very well. He's a very particular author, but yes, it is coming. I don't know when the official announcement will come, but it should be coming. When? Don't know. But don't worry, we are going to get Winds of Winter. It is happening. Don't believe a lot of these silly hype videos. It's not happening. It will happen. But in terms of the final book, God only knows.